even though I do wear scarves and cardigans, I am not actually a genetic counselor. So I'm involved in patient education, and I have a son with Down syndrome. And typically, when someone talks about having a child with Down syndrome, they talk about their diagnosis experience. But, and yes, it's true that I had him when I was 23 years old. And yes, it's true, I was overwhelmed at the time, and I ended up getting great support and had a pretty great experience all around with getting the information I needed. I don't want to talk about that today. I actually want to talk to you about the fact that now we're 18 years down the road, and I've gathered a little list of things that the medical professionals missed, and that I'd really like for you all to know. So, here's my list. All right, so, number one, I wish you all would have told me not to let it go to my head when people will inevitably say, special kids only come to special parents, okay? Because I thought, I've got this down, you know? Everybody's told me I'm amazing, certainly I'm going to be, and it was a huge letdown when I wasn't actually. So, what Bob said is absolutely true. I have lost Andy literally dozens of times. The good thing about this, though, is usually we find him in the electronics section of whatever store we're at, or we find him seated at some kind of bench near the last place that we were. But listen, the thing is, it actually ended up working out because he's learned a lot of independent skills. So when he takes off and he goes to a restaurant, and we don't really know exactly where he is, he'll send us a picture of the menu, and then we know, and he'll text it to us. Yeah, because he has done that and had us end up meeting him there, and he'll kind of be sitting there like a mafia boss, and he'll say, come, you know, and he'll say, like, you know, motion us over to his table. He's like, especially now that he has his own debit card, he'll say, I buy you a drink. You can get a drink. So it's taught him good things. Number two, I wish you had told me that kids will be able to motivate Andy much better than his nerdy parents. This is a very important truth. So when Andy was little, to teach him to ride a tricycle, the therapist, and I kid you not, please don't report me to child services, they told us to duct tape his shoes to the pedals and push him along so he learned to move his feet. And this was recommended, so we did that. But you know what? It didn't actually click until the little girl next door, who was much cuter than any of us, was riding by on her tricycle, and then he was motivated to do it. So there was that, and then when he was about 10 years old, we knew that he could ride without training wheels. We knew he could do it, but we were about to have to pay $200 to do this lose the training wheels camp. Because he was getting, you know, heavier, and he was starting to bend those training wheels up, and it wasn't working so well anymore. So when the day that the money was due, we said, Andy, can you just try it? Just try it with no training wheels. We'll get ice cream for your friends. And all his friends in the neighborhood were sitting out there, and he looks at us and he says, and French fries? I'm like, okay, if you can do it, we will do that too. And so, sure enough, as soon as we took those training wheels off, he was down the street, around the cul-de-sac, and my girls were cheering, Andy, you're our hero, you saved our family $200. So, yeah, so that worked out really well. Number three, I wish you guys had told me that the biggest challenge would not actually be Down syndrome. The hardest part is getting the services we need and also having people believe in him. There have occasionally been people like our swim coach who broke my heart because she said, can he really be in this class? This isn't really the class for him. Even though it was the class where his sister was taking lessons and he was behaving in class. But she said, this isn't really where people like him go. People like that will break my heart. But then I have people who put it back together again, like the mountain bike coach who we took him to go see. And it took him about 35 minutes to go around the trail the first time with her. And when she came back, she said, I know we can do better than that. And so she worked for about a month, got him down to doing it in 12 minutes. And he was the first kid with Down syndrome that I know of to be on a mountain bike team and to race competitively in mountain bike races. So it's pretty cool. So it's important for those families to find their allies. Okay, number 4. I wish you would have told me to not teach him to be so independent, because at some point he's going to scare the crap out of you. And I will tell you my story about that. So we're driving home one day, and Andy says, because he's included in all of his classes, and there's these kids that are starting to work at the local grocery store, and he says, Mom, on the way home, I want to go work at Publix. I said, okay, well, let me check into that and see what's involved. Because I figure I'm going to have to call local rehab, I'm going to have to talk to a special education teacher, I've got to figure out, how to get a job coach set up, all that stuff. Well, I go to start cooking dinner that night, and I'm talking to my mom on the phone, and I end up sending my daughter upstairs once it's done, and I said, go get your brother. She's like, Mom, he's not here. And so then I go out to the garage, and his bike's gone. And I'm like, oh, crud, because it's getting dark. And then I check my phone, and sure enough, I've got 2 missing messages from him, because, I never hear my phone, because I'm a slacker mom. And he said, Mom, I go to Publix, I go get a job, you come get me. And I was like, oh, crud. So I called the store, and I was like, okay, I think there's a boy with Down syndrome who came in. Can you please make sure he doesn't leave, because I don't want him riding home in the dark. And, they're like, all right, we saw him come in. He came to customer service desk. All right. So I'm driving as fast as I can to get over there, but, not too far over the speed limit, because there are kids around. But, and my husband calls at the time, and he's like, Stephanie, would you have ever imagined that at 16, our challenge would be that he took off on his bike to go get a job? And I was like, okay, that's a good point of reflection, And I get there, and sure enough, he had ridden his bike up, and I think in his mind, he thought, I told her I wanted a job. She said she'd look into it, maybe she did, but he's like, the way you go get a job is you go up to the customer service counter and you ask. You don't have to figure out all the job coach thing. And so he did. He went up to the customer service desk and he asked how to get a job. He couldn't quite fill out all the kiosks because he struggles with writing and typing. But they were so impressed with his initiative that they pretty much said, if he can come in and do an interview, we'll hire him. And he's been working now for a year and a half, starting his career. And so number 5, thing I wish I would have been told, is I wish you would have told me that I would learn accomplishments are about more than developmental milestones and academic achievements. And I got this really, really great question when I was at a conference for moms of little kids with Down syndrome this past year. They ended up having a panel of us parents of older kids. And they said, what achievement are you most proud of that has nothing to do with academics or developmental milestones? And I was like, that's a really perceptive question. And when I thought about it, there were really 2 instances that came to mind. One was, there was a moment when my youngest daughter, who's 6 years younger than Andy, was on the basketball court. And she was, she's a real baller, and she jumps in, and she collided against this girl, bounced backwards, and you could hear her head crack against the floor. It was so scary, and everybody in the room just, had a collective. Everyone else was shocked. No one could move. The person who bounded down without thinking about the rules of the game was my son. He jumped over about two seats and scooped up his baby sister. The other one is one day when we were at church, and he'd learned to pass the sacrament in our church. The boys learned to do that between 12 and 18. And he learned to do that. It's a very kind of solemn, reverent thing, and you're not supposed to stop, you're not supposed to talk. But in the midst of it, he saw a young man who was crying because he was leaving and he was going to be going away from home. And in the middle of it, Andy stopped, and he put his arm around this young man. And he said, you're going to be okay. It's okay. And that young man later told us how much it meant to him that Andy stopped and he saw him. And so I guess the greatest lesson I learned from my son is that, and that I'm so grateful that I learned over these 18 years, is that the most important thing a person can accomplish in this life is to understand the intrinsic value of the other human beings around them. And I'm so proud that he's nailed that. So, thank you.